introduce our guest. His name is Dr. John West. He's Vice President and Senior Fellow of the Discovery Institute in Seattle. He serves as Managing Director of the Institute's Center for Science and Culture. And by the way, he co-founded that institute, that center, with philosopher of science Stephen Meyer, who we love, way back in 1996. His current research examines the impact of science and scientism on public policy and culture. His other areas of expertise include constitutional law, American government and institutions, and religion and politics. John West holds a PhD in government from Claremont Graduate University and was previously an associate professor of political science at Seattle Pacific University, which is a university that we're going to talk about some in this podcast. And at that university, he chaired the Department of Political Science and Geography, and he has directed a dozen documentaries. He's written or edited some 13 books, including the book we're going to be talking about today, his most recent book, Stockholm Syndrome Christianity, and the subtitle's important: Why America's Christian Leaders Are Failing and What We Can Do About It. Chapter 4, Rebuilding the Walls of Hostility. This is an important chapter as well, where you talk about how Stockholm Syndrome Christianity provides this or produces this divisive view of race and class. Talk about the anti-racist movement. It sounds so good, but there's a distinct problem with anti-racism.
Yeah, and here's the tragedy, again, of Christians who don't want to really defend the Bible because they, without good teaching, I think the Bible is the greatest engine of human dignity and equality in the history of mankind. I mean, no question. And so if you're not willing to draw on that resource, then you basically, there's the gap. And so what has filled the gap are these so-called anti-racism, which really is just racism. But it comes back. I mean, let's go back to the Darwinian story. Darwin, again, thought human beings weren't created in the image of God. We descended with common ancestors from ape-like creatures, and then that helped fuel discussions of higher and lower races, who was more evolved than others, and that really debuted and fomented a view of scientific racism and the idea that race defines you more than your fellow religious beliefs or other beliefs. And where did that lead? Well, on the left, it led to people who basically, they say they're against racism, but they imbibe this underlying structure that they actually think race or ethnicity is paramount. And so they just disagree about who the oppressor class is. So if they're being oppressed, the idea is that they should become, in essence, the oppressor. And so it's all about power. It's not about building common ground. It's not about building, that all people are created equal and that we should be aspiring to equal standards and loving one another because we're all created in the image of God. It's that, no, they buy into, it's all about power and these tribal groups, these racial groups. And so if we happen to be Black or Hispanic or whatever, we should identify with our own, and then we should be pushing back about anyone else as the oppressor. And the thing is, this is also, I write about this a little bit in the book. It's become more pronounced since I wrote the book. But so you have that on the left. You have something that's really disturbing on the right that mimics it among secularists on the right, but also among some self-described, I don't think they're accurately described as in the Reform view, where they basically accept this diagnosis that, it's all about race and tribalism. And they just say, well, but since we're white, we should be supreme. And so they're actual white supremacists. And the thing is, both of these ideas, which have some derivation from Darwinian evolution, are false. And that the tragedy of the Christians who stood out and weren't preaching biblical equality is there was a vacuum for these noxious pseudo-Darwinian and other views to just rush in. And I think that's what we're seeing. And to go back to Andy Stanley, I think you see a microcosm of how this happens. He has a really poignant story in his book, Irresistible, about how a father came to him early in his career with his daughter, and his daughter was dating a black man and wanted to marry him, and he wanted Andy Stanley to, read the riot act to his daughter and to tell her that, in God's view, that, this was an abomination because, and the example he gave is that God was irate with Moses for marrying a black woman. Okay. Well, the clearest thing to say on that, well, first of all, is that's completely false. In fact, God was upset with Miriam and Aaron for being upset that Moses married who he married. And so it's the complete opposite. But what is Andy Stanley? How is he using this? He actually says, well, I didn't really want to get into a debate over this, and that wasn't really productive. And so he said something about, do you want to lose your daughter or do you want to hold to your ideas? And okay, maybe pastorally that made sense in that situation. I don't know, but he uses it as an example for why we should abandon the Old Testament. He uses it as, we'll see, the Old Testament leads to things like racism, rather than, I would use an example of, this is why we get things like critical race theory on the left, and then sort of the racialism on the fringe of the right, is because people like Andy Stanley aren't willing to give good teaching. The Bible, like I said, is an engine of human dignity and equality, from Genesis to Revelation. And for a Christian pastor to not give good teaching, I'd say that the father who came to see him, the fact that that father had such a distorted view of what the Bible said is an example of not of the Old Testament failure, but the failure of Christian preachers like Andy Stanley to actually tell them what the Bible actually says.
Yeah, and a beautiful point. And you say that the Bible has served as the greatest bulwark against racism. And the Bible has also helped people understand equality of human beings throughout human history. So this is the bulwark, and the Bible's actually being denigrated. That's the insidious nature of this.
It is. And this is yet another fruit of not being willing to defend the authority of the Bible, is now we see it in the area of race. And like I said, you see it on the left, but you also see it, these pernicious people that on the right who claim to be Christians, who are themselves, if you read their works, are imbibing Darwinian evolution. They actually cite Darwinian arguments for racism. It's such a tragedy, because you're right, the Bible, one reason why I think actually people should read creation stories from other religions is not because I think they're true, because they're not, but they'll begin to see just how absolutely unique the Bible's creation story is. If you read, say, the Laws of Manu, the Hindu creation story, where we don't reflect God's image, we reflect the image of different pieces of the gods. And so some people are actually in the image of the feet, and they're only meant to be slave classes. In their creation story, inequality is built in. Compare that to what the Bible teaches of male and female created in the image of God. This was a radically, we are so, because we're living in the light of this type of thinking, from the Bible, people take it for granted. But if the Bible had never existed, a lot of things would be awful. But, this idea of human equality, it comes from there. And then, certainly Christians, when I see some right-wing Christians now saying that their ethnicity is more important, that they have more to share with, say, fellow American-born, Americans of their same race than they do with Christians in Africa. Well, that's absolutely false. One of the great joys of being a Christian when I travel is being with Christians of other races, ethnicities, nationalities, and realizing how much we have that we share together. In fact, it's a tremendous thing that almost everywhere in the world you travel here, you actually have brothers and sisters. And for anyone who has traveled, and I haven't traveled as much as many people, but when I have traveled, especially outside the United States, let alone in different areas of the United States, having brothers and sisters, finding a biblical church is one of the most inspiring, powerful things that could ever happen. And so, and then just the history of getting rid of slavery and the arguments against that, and some of the misconstruals of people thinking the Bible was pro-slavery. No, it's not. And I go through that in a little bit of depth in there. So I'm trying to equip people here also that when they hear these objections to actually articulate a biblical view of equality. And I think so tragic post, say, 2020. And I don't think it was tragic in 2020 that with George Floyd's death and things that many white Christians began to think we really need to face the issues we have in our society about race and ethnicity. That was honorable. The problem is, rather than going to the Bible and going to the rich Christian tradition to teach about equality and dignity, many of them went to places like, the church that I was in. People wanted to read Robin DiAngelo, who's white, a white woman, White Fragility, which is not at all biblical, and it's really pernicious. And so the tragedy is so many Christian churches aped the culture rather than going to the rich Christian tradition of biblical teaching on human equality and dignity.